doing what you love on the positive side is not just a feel good about it kind of advice. It's also very strategic advice
Mm,
because when you do things you do like, they tend to have an upward spiral
yeah.
as opposed to a downward spiral of bad habits as an upward spiral where so when you do the thing that you do feel charged up about, maybe not like 100% love, but like 90% love, even that can be really helpful.
Yeah.
And I think, if we had an 18-year-old here in the room right here, I would just probably not try to use such absolutist language. Just because you don't love something 100% doesn't mean you don't love it 90%. And just because you're unsure doesn't mean you have to become very sure.
Welcome to the Kaizen Blueprint, the podcast dedicated to helping you achieve a better life through continuous improvement. If you're ready to elevate your finances, grow your investments, and unlock your full potential, you're in the right place. Each episode brings expert insights on personal development, finance, and real estate, giving you the tools to build lasting success. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Dan, welcome to the show. How are you, bud?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. I wanted to start off and ask you one question
Sure.
first. What do you do, and how is that important in life?
What do I do for money or what do I do in my free time?
For money.
Sure. So I'm a civil engineer by education from Temple University. And specifically what I do is I do transportation engineering, mostly leaning towards traffic engineering, which I can bug you about later.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But why is that important on everyday life?
Oh, well, when's the last time you were stuck in traffic?
Whoa. Couple
Or taking a train,
yesterday.
right?
Yesterday, actually, yeah.
Where were you stuck in traffic? Was it the highway or a local road?
Definitely a highway.
There you go. But yeah, I mean, this weekend is, Labor Day weekend. This is one of those weekends, just like in this part of the world we're living, like Philly, New Jersey area. Tons of people going from, say, the city to the shore, back again. Um, Anything from, the streets outside of this building right here, how the intersection works, as far up as how do you have thousands of vehicles passing the same point,
Hmm.
hour after hour after hour in different weather or conditions or, you know, condition of the driver
Yeah.
and make that all flow. And then I work on an element increasingly, which is asking the question, how do you make it flow safely?
Mm,
Not just for one person, but for most of them. Because most people, when they think about traffic or transportation, we've been geared as professionals, but also as just people in general to think about how do I get from A to B as fast as possible?
right.
And in general, as time has gone on, as places like, say, Philly have gotten denser, more people living in city areas rather than suburbs, you get these problems where people experience questions like, am I safe doing this? Is there a level of stress that I
Hmm.
experience just being a bicyclist on the road or going out for a morning jog? And I have to compete with a vehicle going at like 50 miles an hour down that road outside.
Mm.
So it's a fun little complicated world to live in. And the more I do it, the more I like it. So
And how do you calculate how if it makes sense for a particular road or a particular like for example, right? We have places in Los Angeles when there's 6, maybe 10 lanes
yeah.
at a given highway, and in Philly here we have 3 or 4. 95 just have 5 now. Does that make it easier for someone to drive? Is that make the traffic less? Or does that make it even more because now, okay, there's more lanes, so more people sway into going to that highway?
That's a great question. Not to dive too far back in history, but the question you're asking is what people, almost a century ago at this point, were asking the exact same question. Um, to give a little brief history, you know, World War II happened, and a lot of people, namely the General Eisenhower who became president, was like, wow, those German forces are moving around quite well with the highway. Wish we had kind of an interstate highway system too. These things all started happening with the Works Product Administration, Federal Highway Administration, which today is the FHWA, which oversees a lot of DOTs, which is kind of where people like me typically do work for.
Hmm.
And the question that you just asked, like, hey, man, if I'm feeling full, if I loosen my belt, can I eat some more? That question has been a huge part of the story of, at least American civil engineering, transportation engineering for the better part of our modern car history,
Hmm.
at least from the 50s forward. And that question has been asked in increasingly quantitative ways since the 1950s, even before then, really. Um, the short answer to your question that you asked pretty well, no, it does not help. What you're referring to is something called induced demand, which the idea is like, I have 4 lanes of traffic. It's pretty crowded. I'm going to loosen the belt. I'm going to add a 5th lane or a 6th lane. For a very short time, it does somewhat alleviate the congestion. Over enough time, though, maybe not a year, but maybe several years or at least a decade or so, induced demand is that you are changing the behavior of the people using the system. So in this case, they begin using it more.
Mm.
And that takes effect in a lot of ways. Philadelphia, where we're both at as we're recording this, is a phenomenal example to discuss it because we have freeways,
Yep.
which people usually call highways. We have highways, which are things like, say, Broad Street or the Roosevelt Boulevard, which are at grade, we would say, at level, and they have different intersections and all that. But it changes because the thing about at least engineering is that if I drop this water bottle,
Mm-hmm.
it'll drop with the same weight, with the same speed, the same mass and acceleration. It'll drop the same way here as if it would do in London or in Beijing, because that's basic physics, right?
Right.
When you're building material as people driving a car or riding a bike, people in London don't have to be like people in Philly, and people in Philly don't have to be like people in, say, Beijing. So if you apply the notion that, if we make the belt looser, the highway wider, people will logically, have more space on it, doesn't necessarily hold true because the people you're building it for and with react in their own independent and sometimes chaotic ways.
Yeah. Does it make sense for government to just build more highways and freeways so that people could just
If you look at the way a lot of things are funded, you would think they think that. But increasingly, in my opinion, we're lucky to be living through a time when people are really creatively assessing that's probably not been the case, and we should probably try something else. Um, 95 that we're both experienced with, a lot of people in the nation experience 95 or a lot of other highways like it. Um, what if you could move even a quarter of those people via some other method, transit, whatever else have you, and not have that amount of real estate dedicated to highway space? What would you do with the space you got back? Could it be houses? Could it be businesses? Could it be a new community? It could at least not be a maintenance fee or a construction fee. So people are increasingly getting curious about if this ultimately doesn't work, right? If 4 lanes didn't work, then 6 lanes isn't working. Oh, we live in LA. We'll try 10 lanes. Oh, that's not even working. We're somewhere in Texas and this isn't working. People are, at different levels, naturally kind of losing steam on the idea that, like, all right, well, are we going to add a 12th lane? Are we going to make this a 20-lane highway? No one really takes that seriously. There's no real reason that you would think so.
Yeah.
So people are becoming more and more curious about, well, there's so many other places in the world. We don't necessarily have to become Amsterdam or Tokyo or whatever, but if someone has a good idea, can we steal a bit of it? Or can we at least use the knowledge that we've had for quite a while that we've never really acted on?
Yeah.
What's hard about engineering is that, at least this kind of piece of it, is it's very easy to explain to you or me or anyone why you don't want this building to fall on your head.
Mhm.
Everyone gets that feeling immediately. I don't want to get collapsed on. But when you tell people, hey, your quality of travel, of being the traveling public, could be different or better anyway, but you'll have to maybe be more amongst other people or do something that is at this time uncomfortable or novel to you. Again, your most critical building material is not the asphalt or the concrete or the pavement striping. Your unique building material is the people that you would make the system for,
Yeah.
which is why, even though really I'm only competent to, just make some basic calculations
Sure.
and draw plans, you get into this kind of weird nebulous field where the issue at hand can be helped and informed by engineering and planning as well. But ultimately, it's a people issue. So a lot of times my curiosity, but also my hesitancy is that just because I went to a college for a thing doesn't make me a spokesperson for it necessarily. Just like you can go to college for whatever.
Yeah.
But your experience doesn't encompass every single person. Certainly not. Um, so at least in my youngish engineering career so far, definitely taking perspective of the people living in the places where you want to make your grand changes is increasingly a thing I consider and think about because I'm never going to know enough.
Is that why you wanted to go into civil engineering?
That's a good question. I went into civil engineering so that I could just avoid being bothered by my parents. That's the answer to that question. Um, I did not want to study or do anything serious.
Okay.
And so if you say, so you graduate high school and you say, oh, I'm going to do engineering. And you know, you have like 2 years of gen eds like maths and science or, whatever. And you know, you can put off actually thinking about your career from 18 to 20. That's phenomenal.
Mhm.
And I got to be lazy that way. um, I say that jokingly. Obviously, I don't recommend that to necessarily people, but, you know, for me, I've been lucky in a way because looking back at it now, we look back at our lives and it looks like there's an author writing with a pen that's very deliberate,
Yeah.
but at the time it looks very chaotic and random. That was my perspective then. Speaking of you sitting here now, I see the 12-year-old me playing SimCity, and I
Mm.
see the 30-ish-year-old me
Playing
doing this right now. Well, yeah,
SimCity.
yeah, for kind of doing the same game, this time more seriously and for money, right?
Yeah.
Um, but if you had caught me at like 22, it's like, well, I'm a college dropout, drop into community college, matriculate to a local college, which is doing really well in Philly now, Temple. Uh, um, and really um, come to this. I've been delighted to find out that I'm able to make money doing something I actually do love versus something that like,
So what pushed you in terms of what kind of shift the gear there or flip the switch of like, okay, I dropped out, but then now I'm pursuing something that
yeah.
I would have thought I enjoyed back then, and now I enjoy it too. Like looking back now, what made you that change of okay, now I'm going to pursue something?
Well, first off, I want to thank you for the question because this is obviously going to be a free therapy session for me. This is great. This is awesome. Um, I mean, if I'm keeping it real with you, I mean, like, in that interim between I dropped out and came back to community, my mom passed kind of suddenly
Mm,
and, sobered me up in several ways. um, and when I came back, I kind of had a determination to make it right for my parents, if nothing else. Um, Still didn't love the things I was doing. I was just like, oh, let me pass this class. And as I got into it, really, I found a way to find my tribe, like friends I still have today.
mm.
And it sounds funny, but man, like there's so many classes I studied hard for so that I could become a reliable source for them to cheat off of.
Oh,
And vice versa, by the way.
that's not
And
good
I would cheat.
friendship. Oh,
Well, no,
okay.
no, it's
There's a
well,
reciprocity. Okay.
well, the thing is, and anyone who's been a STEM major of any kind or whatever else, um, anything with at least one math class in it, knows that it's a collaborative cheating. It is a sincere and good. It's weird. I talk to like young hires today, and it's like the phrase where it's like, "All right, take my homework, but make it look different."
Do not try this at school.
But it's kind of funny because like today, if a new hire came to me and I was like, "Here, you have to do this task. Here's how I did it the first time. By all means, take how I did it,
Hmm.
but think actively as you're doing it. Because if you can get there, if you can get 70% of the way of this kind of done off understanding, more or less, and the 30% you're completely unclear about, that's phenomenal. You know what I mean? That's more than halfway there.
Collaborative effort.
Yeah. But in any case, I commuted to campus, so every day taking the train, sometimes driving, but taking the train mostly. The classes you take, whether it's structural design or water resources or just basic physics, I kept looking out the train window and thinking, I understand like a very tiny piece of this, just a little bit more than I did yesterday, and that is kind of cool. I do feel something fun with that. Um, a recurring theme is like, oh, if you want to go into engineering, you have to be good at math and science, or you have to like math and science.
Sure.
I, practically speaking, that is good advice. um, but personally, rather, I think that it's a bit of if you're interested in the world around you as you walk around it, that's probably the more interesting question. Because once you determine that you like it and you're invested in it, you can choose to apply yourself and learn.
Yeah.
Um,
So there's like three themes that I just
Yeah,
heard from what you just said
sure.
that kind of trigger that point of you going to where you are today.
Yeah,
One is that big event that causes you to, okay, I gotta change myself up here.
sure.
One is the death of your mother. Sorry to hear that. Number two is that you got to stay accountable to your friends
Yeah.
in that STEM class. And then number three, you start applying the things that you learn on a daily basis, whether you're taking a train or driving a car, you're just looking at things and
Yeah.
you're like, oh, okay, I understand a little bit. You start implementing and you start putting things together, you start learning and connecting things around you, and that kind of push you even further into now I want to pursue this.
Yeah, and to be frank, by the time I got my degree, I was enjoying the class, I like the topics. I was doing it not just to pass anymore, I was doing it for the energy of it. And even then, I, man, this is saying stuff on camera, I've not even said it myself, but, like, I took a lot of classes really because my dad being a structural engineer,
Mm,
I leaned into structural classes. I was like, "I'll make my dad proud. I'm gonna show him I can do this."
collaborative effort with your dad.
Yeah, I'm gonna show him I can do this, you know what I mean? I'll go from being the dropout to the kid who took the advanced elective in whatever, structural dynamics or whatever. So I graduate with a course list and resume that kinda looks like a certain way, get a job appropriate to it, and 2.5 years into that my first job, which I had an excellent employer, and someone who was fired up about what they do.
Hmm.
Every day coming to work, I was like, "Man, I'm not fired up about this thing the way that person is." And that person is not young, they're a senior engineer, you know, all that. And I was like, "I wanna be a person like that, but I'm not seeing it here." And I was like I had this wild notion where I was like, "Hold on, I have a degree, I could technically do anything with it. What would I do with it?" If I was just thinking. Um, 'Cause I just I hate to do stuff for my own sake, because then I have to be accountable for it. It's
Why?
easier. I think it's the answer is because that's my tick. But when you do stuff, like, because, "Oh, you do this because you get a good income, and you do this because you get good stability, and this job sector is growing, and aren't you smart for finding that?" Those are all things you explain to yourself, and you tell your friends and your family, "Oh, I'm doing this because 'cause I'm gonna be a successful young person." When you say, "Oh, I'm doing this because I can't get this topic out of my head,"
Mm,
then you have to take accountability for it, and then you're very open to people's speculation. And part of me for growing up has been getting serious enough with myself to lean into that.
got it.
Because 2.5 years in my first job, which is when I switched to my second, which is really when my growth path really started and accelerated. Um, you know, that notion of do what you love has a lot of elements that are true and some that are maybe unhelpful. But I had to kind of realizing slowly over time that if you don't do what you love, eventually you're going to be doing that thing and run into someone who's doing it for a reason that they love it.
Hmm.
If you only do things for only rational reasons, you will eventually climb high enough. You've met someone who's doing them for not entirely quote unquote motivated or rational reasons. And then you cannot compete with those people. And really personally, you can't enjoy something that's occupying, you know, over 2,000 hours a year of your life,
Yeah.
assuming you work 40 hours a week.
But that's
Yeah,
difficult, right? I mean,
it sucks.
you there the the wording of do what you love is very difficult, especially for a young person. So
Yeah.
how do you figure out the things that you love? What would you recommend for someone who's maybe in college or maybe in high school now? You hear that all the time. That's always like the quote, right? Do do what is you're passionate about, or
Yeah.
do what you love. How do you go about finding that
I
thing?
mean, it's kind of like this is not my analogy. I've heard this other places, but you know, we all go to the same carnival or the arcade, and if you've got a lot of quarters in your pocket, you can try as many games as you like. If you only got
Mm,
1 or 2 quarters in your pocket, you have to try a game and hopefully win it and be good at it the first or the second time. So, kind of blithely telling people, do what you love. It comes from a place of maybe well-meaning, but also comes from a place of privilege sometimes.
sure.
Sometimes you don't have the opportunity. You got to be really good at something the first time, or otherwise you're in debt from college and you're not going to climb out.
Yeah.
Right? Uh, and sometimes you just pick a STEM major because you know you need the money to pay off that college.
Mm, yeah.
But point is, like, doing what you love on the positive side is not just a feel good about it kind of advice. It's also very strategic advice because
Mm,
when you do things you do like, they tend to have an upward spiral
yeah.
as opposed to a downward spiral of bad habits, as an upward spiral where like, oh, I can't get this idea out of my head. Like, man, like I'm learning about, traffic and transportation engineering issues. Oh, like why congestion issues, this and that. And then you see a thing on Facebook about someone's talking about, say, the Roosevelt Boulevard subway. And you're like, oh, that's so cool. I'm going to go. I don't care if it's a Saturday morning topic. I'll go because that's interesting as a person, as a Philadelphian, but also a professional. And then it starts to ricochet and you meet people who are also a little bit weird like you in that way.
Mm,
And it's that upward spiral. So when you do the thing that you do feel charged up about, um, maybe not like 100% love, but like 90% love, even that can be really helpful.
yeah.
And I think, if we had an 18-year-old here in the room right here, I would just probably not try to use such absolutist language. Just because you don't love something 100% doesn't mean you don't love it 90%. And just because you're unsure doesn't mean you have to become very sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Which makes sense,
yeah,
right? I think the do what you love, it's a temporary motivation. It's how can I find the things that I love? And one of the first thing is taking action. As you mentioned,
right,
you start doing stuff and sometimes you start filtering out the things that you don't like,
right.
or you just pursue the strength that you have success in. For example, if you are someone who is extroverted and perhaps
Yes.
you network a lot and have
Yeah.
a
Oh,
great
yeah.
group of friends, or maybe have a great group of network, you don't know whether you're going to be good at sales, for example, a
Sure.
realtor. But then let's say you're just starting out as an executive assistant to a top realtor in a
Right.
city, right? Now
Right.
you're like, okay, now I'm start talking to different clients for my boss, and
Hmm.
oh, I figure out I'm really good at talking to people, but I'm not really good at doing the numbers.
Sure.
So let's
It's
just go
totally
out
fair.
there and then
Yeah.
meet people, go to networking events, golfing clubs,
Yeah.
things like that. And now, okay, now I really find what I really love,
Yeah. And
talking to
it's
people, and then you can monetize that through
right.
other things.
And it's kind of like just take our normal friendships. How much music or food or movies or just anything that you like, if you remove the influence of your friends from it, you would never have heard about it, right?
Mhm.
It's ridiculous. You'd be living on an island. You can apply that same basic notions of friendship and society and socializing to your professional realm as well, right? Because if I live my life as fast as I can, but only me at a time, I will never catch up with, like, say, Aldo, who may chose to go out and network with in a year, maybe 20, 30, or 40 or 50 people.
Yeah.
Because, you don't have to vibe their entire life story. But when you surround yourself with people who are a little, have that contagion of excitement or interest and curiosity, again, it's that upward spiral. It ricochets,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
Your network is really huge. You surrounding yourself with
Yeah.
like-minded individuals can greatly affect of what you do too.
Yeah. It's like, I don't know if you follow more sports or athletic stuff or video games or whatever else. I'm a big music guy. Like, why do I know so many musicians? Because I like music.
Mm.
And if you think you like something, the easiest litmus test for finding it out is hang out with people who already do like it,
Yeah.
you know? So if you were an 18-year-old, you're right here, like thinking to themselves, I like this thing or that thing, go hang out with the people who already do and then see how you feel afterwards.
Got it. That's awesome. I
Yeah.
want to shift gear here
Sure.
and
Yeah.
ask you more of the civil engineering
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. Sure.
You mentioned about SimCity.
I
You
did.
enjoy SimCity and building the city from the ground up.
Yeah.
How are you doing that today with your kind of your expertise?
Hmm. So, I mean, wow. So SimCity basically is like the game of, we have a lot, but not infinite amount of land uses, right? Like basic things like hospital, fire station, uh, you know, trash center, but
Yep.
also entertainment district things. And then the game is really won on the way that you space and connect them, right? Any given sandbox or any scenario or any campaign, whatever else. Um, at least for me, and I'm sure there's a million SimCity players out on Reddit who could contradict me, but like, and there's other games like it. The challenge of the game becomes you have only the space of, say, this table.
Sure.
Here's your city. This cool land use is here. That cool land use is there. If they're too far separated, they don't interact with each other. All right, so bring them closer. But now you brought them closer, so now it's trade-offs.
Yeah.
Now this thing won't happen. So it's really a game of time and space and connection. And that's really all that city building or world building in general is. As a civil engineer, you don't look at the whole game of that necessarily. You'll be looking at one specific piece of it.
Mm.
Like, I mean, very few people I would imagine walk into their office and say, let me consider the entire city today. You work on teams.
Yeah.
You're one piece of a team. And that's the best way to be because a team is fun to work on. And why should a city be left in the fate of one mind? That's
Sure.
It's like not like Robert Moses or Ed Bacon back in the day or whatever else. In my corner of the world, though, the issue of connection, right, is where I focus. There are engineers and people in general, developers, structurals, who make A and build B,
Mm.
right? But A and B are only meaningful if you can get to and from it,
Mm.
right? So how do you do that in the best way, the safest way, most usable way? That's our question again. So for me, like the thing that got me to SimCity, which actually my dad complimented me on back in the day. I remember because I was in a Future City competition, which is a great thing for
What is that?
Future City is basically like you would use SimCity to like plan out your city, use the scores and metrics of the game to say if the city concept was working, and then you'd write about it kind of qualitatively, and then make more or less like not a diorama, but a physical representation of it.
Mm.
And you present it for competition, and it still goes on today.
So how do you win?
You're evaluated by a panel of judges, and the judges are typically like actually people I work with or would work with. I participated back when I was a kid in 8th grade, and actually we won an honorable mention award from a transportation firm, which I probably should have thought more about as a kid.
And yeah,
because it indicated what I should have gone into the first time.
yeah. What I was trying to get at is what makes a city great.
Like
Based on the like the judges and the panels
Mm.
is, let's say you have the set city and
Yeah.
you build in a certain way. What makes it a great city? Is it the land? You have a good distribution of where the residents are and then the workstation and it's a
Well,
quick
so
transportation.
unfortunately, there's no one answer to that question. No one thing makes a city great.
Mm.
I mean, say we're in Philadelphia right now.
Right.
I love the city. But objectively, there's many things that we would all wish to change about it. Oh, this piece of the road is flooding. This piece of the community is maybe crime ridden or has issues with other like health concerns. This part is just terrible traffic. This part they party too loud in.
Mm.
A great city can still have objective problems with trade offs,
Sure.
but in that competition, or at least in the SimCity world, um, at least like a lot of it would be how much money does your city generate.
Mm.
Which again, as human beings, we don't think about that. I'm not saying that's actually the most critical concern.
Yeah.
But by no means, right? But an interesting thing that I reflected on as I got older is I think about there was never any parking lots in the game, ever. And I discovered this as I got older, was that for the game makers, and I hope I'm remembering this correctly, to make the game function, they originally had the idea of parking lots in it and realized a lot of their assumptions about connectivity would fall apart if they had so much surface parking. And so what essentially happens when you're playing SimCity
Yeah.
is that if you make a building for 100 people, there's a fake imaginary, like, storage space for the 100 people's cars underneath or whatever,
Underneath the building.
which obviously you don't do that in real life. But that problem they ran into is so interesting because that's a real problem that cities run into all the time.
Yeah.
There's so many like urban planners making phenomenal GIS maps of here's all the footprint, square feet, square whatever yards of surface parking in city downtowns. What if you could remove even a quarter of it?
Mm.
And again, make it housing or businesses or whatever. How could you change the fabric of a place?
Yeah.
So these are the things. You start out asking a question like as simple as, how do I make sure the water drains from the crown of the road into the gutter? How do I make sure the sidewalk is sloped so that water doesn't accumulate on it or whatever? How do I make sure the intersection timing is such? That's a more immediate day-to-day job question.
Yeah.
But at large, we all tackle these questions of how does a city work as a overall fabric,
Mm.
And no one discipline, no one person only does that alone.
Got it.
Teamwork.
Just a curious question. So if based on your own research and perhaps places that you ever visited, which city do you think have the best infrastructure?
I've asked people the exact same question. Actually, a lot of urban planners, and you tend to get. I've heard Barcelona a few times.
Barcelona? Okay.
Yeah, Amsterdam. Like every planning company, like someone's like, "Oh, you got to go to Amsterdam or Utrecht or whatever else." Um, these are actually touted as like the top places for a lot of reasons because they're so multimodal
Hmm.
and there's such a good balance of walking, biking, and safe but efficient, car traffic. Um, Great question. I would I would love to try out like kind of more a mix of European cities in general. Some places in Asia, like Japan, some places have phenomenal ideas and things they're implementing. You and I've chatted about before.
Sure.
When the World Cup comes here, you'll have a huge mass entertainment event, and a lot of people there will be used to a different transportation system compared to 95.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited as a person, but also as a professional, to see what feelings and sensations come from that.
Yeah.
How we change our city after that.
Yeah. I mean, I've been to Japan and I've been to Amsterdam,
Yeah.
and they're pretty much really great walkable city.
Yeah.
And something that's great about Japan is that the subway system is always clean. It's
Yeah.
it's on time, and the people are obviously in the right attitude of waiting in line, as opposed to Philly.
Sure.
It's like,
Sure.
you have people just running into it.
Sure.
I feel as though in the city where you can have a great infrastructure, great rules, a great just transportation systems, it's all based on the people to follow the rules and make sure that it's safe. And
The people are a unique building material,
exactly,
right?
that's the variable, right?
This house, the same wood and concrete, again, can be built with the same physical principles, no
Hmm.
matter where we go on the planet, right? Building codes aside.
Yeah.
But again, yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, if you have a culture that for X, Y, or Z reason sees taking the train as their main mode, their attitudes reflect it. And because their attitudes reflect it, the people who design it, which are the more immediate engineers and planners, have different kind of building options in a way. And we're here though.
Hmm.
We're in America. We're in this case in Philly. People here, it's unreasonable to ask them, oh, become something like the people in Amsterdam. That's not going to happen. That's human beings. And this is where it gets interesting because nominally, people like me, or at least tangential to me, design these systems. This doesn't make us psychologists and
Yeah.
people who should pontificate
Yeah.
about why or this or that. We can quantify, we can provide objectivity for things that are objectively, ascertainable. But
Is there any way you can enforce it based on your studies, analytics, things like that?
well, you wouldn't want to enforce it. You would want people to do it out of their choice and out of their reasoning, right?
Mm.
The thing though over time is that you don't have to enforce it. There's a reason, and I say this anecdotally, but like there's a reason that if it was Friday night or Saturday night or date night, whatever, you're probably going to choose to go to a place just pedestrian friendly, walkable, well built, well designed, not kind of monolithic and overarching, but rather brings you into it. There's a reason that they're like north of this area, places like Newtown or Peddler's Village or New Hope, or places like in Jersey, like Princeton,
Mm.
that are considered great date places. Same thing in certain parts of downtown Philly. You would never be like, oh, we should we should find whatever like restaurant is by like exit this or that of 95. Or
Sure.
I keep using 95 as an example. Shout out to 95. But or like you never be like, oh man, it's a date night. Let's find whatever's nice along like I-76 or like Roosevelt Boulevard. That doesn't really happen. You don't really need to enforce it per se. People are people.
How do you enforce it in disguise of autonomy?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, it's incentives, right? You create things in a way that like say for example, the reason a lot of folks don't like transit here is because perceptions and notions of safety or not safety,
Mm.
which is a completely fair thing to bring up. Who wants to be in a place where you're not safe?
Sure.
I don't. But then there's the objective data that we can say, oh, XYZ is improving, XYZ is getting worse, whatever else. And then there's doing it enough that you shift attitudes. And man, I would suggest this though as an interesting point of view. If someone were to look up rates of driver licenseship over the past 30 years, they're not going up, they're going down, and they're going down a little bit sharply.
So there's less people with driver license.
Yes. Why that is?
And is that new drivers or existing drivers?
New drivers.
New drivers.
Basically, yeah. So the statistic is something of the nature of like, say in 1990, your average 17-year-old who had a license was like in this percent. Now today it's a good bit lower.
Yeah.
Why is that? I mean, you can say maybe it's money, maybe it's cars, maybe it's just a lot of things, right? But at any rate, we do know there are less young people driving. We also
Mm,
do know that, I mean, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, certainly, you didn't see any e-scooters or e-bikes. Come
that's
on,
true.
come on. If you have more options, you might do more things. So as your notions of how do I get myself from A to B change, the people in our seats have to ask ourselves, what is it about the systems we're doing? Are we making a system that can accommodate all these and then hopefully grow in a healthy way? Or are we over prioritizing only one mode of transportation?
I think that comes with the economy as well, where you
Yeah.
have the younger people, or what I call the delay generations.
Oh,
They delaying the marriage. They're delaying buying a house, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
They're delaying going to university, maybe because they don't have enough funding.
Sure.
Things right now are very expensive,
Yeah,
so as a result, we would just want to live near the school, and
sure.
sometimes you get an apartment at a school,
Right.
and you know this, living in downtown, just knowing downtown Philadelphia, an apartment itself, it costs $200 to $300 just for a parking spot in your
Yeah.
apartment
Yeah.
buildings. However, since we have the mode of transportation of buses, trains,
Right.
or trolleys, or the e-bikes that you just mentioned, or Indigo, right? This is
Yeah.
just local
Incredibly
bikes.
popular. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so people are they rather just have a good location where everything is there in terms of supermarkets,
Right.
fitness studios, or just activities or restaurants in
Right.
general, as opposed to buying a car, because having a car costs a lot, right? You have
Yeah.
car insurance, which are continuously increasing. You
Maintenance,
have
all that.
maintenance, you
Yeah.
have gas.
Yeah.
They rather just remove all that, live in a really good location, and
Yeah.
then just be around. And obviously, work from home plays a factor too, where you don't
Absolutely.
have to drive as much, and
Yeah.
get Uber, you get Uber Eats, Walmart Plus, you get
That's
groceries to your house.
that's why this is such just a cool time. Honestly, I'm lucky to be doing what I'm doing. It's like I feel like I'm doing what I'm doing honestly at a time where gold rush is not the right word because that's not what it is. Rather, like these narrow streets here were considered hyper undesirable like when I was a kid. Now like this is some of the one of the most fun areas of Philly.
Sure.
Um so whether it's cost, you can maybe someone says to themselves, I can always get more money, or maybe I'm just lucky I'm born in whatever else. You can't get more time.
Mm.
You're always losing the time. And if you present an option where it's like you could do this commute in a 35-minute train or a 70-minute car ride, people would probably take the train on that. Oh, if that was the only criteria. Or if you spell it out to them, your chances of having a severe or fatal accident or crash, not accident, crash. Um, I'll go into that in a second. um, is much higher driving than taking transit. That's also a really big concern, not just for individuals, but for municipalities.
Mm.
Because if you're the city of whatever, and you say, oh, this percent of my, tax paying citizens will have a pretty bad or a fatal crash, that's at a human level, it's tragic. From a city's point of view, that's also money they're never going to see,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So there are practical concerns, which again is why to kind of like zoom in on this, the question of how can I not be in a traffic jam, that's been asked for at least since the 1950s. But the question of how can I not die in traffic, quantitatively speaking, has really only been aggressively asked since about 2010
Why is that?
because it's hard to quantify. If um, if we say, here's your 4-lane intersection,
Mhm.
and there's cars coming from all these directions, there's a traffic signal, it has a certain timing. Okay, and you can optimize that timing. That's true. How can I make sure the intersection flushes out cars and travels things as best as it can, right? That question is getting into it now was starting to be asked in a thing called the Highway Capacity Manual, starting around 1950, because it's a normal question. Imagine if you're the mayor of the city and you hire me to make you some roads for a new neighborhood, right? A new
Mhm.
neighborhood of houses with new roads, and you tell me, Dan, well, how will it come up with my system? Will it shut it down? Will it be bad? And I say, no idea. You would never hire me.
Yeah.
So that's why we've been so good at quantifying flow and capacity, right? Kind of just like the flow of this water out of the bottle if
Yeah.
I make the opening wider or not. But questions of like, are you safe? What are the chances you're gonna have a fender bender today versus die in traffic today from a
Yeah.
crash? That's really hard, actually, from a quantitative, objective perspective to get into. Because what do you do? Do you look at police crash records? That's one way, but then you're biased towards historicity, right?
Mm.
Do you look at systemic characteristics of the roadway typology? That's useful because you're being proactive, but then you need a lot of data to kind of normalize it and have a good empirical background of it. Do you really combine it? So the highway capacity manual asks questions of flow and movement, and it's been around for 3/4 of a century, right?
Yeah.
But the highway safety manual, which is these are just publications, manuals, things created out of tons of research, um, has only been around since 2010, and its next edition, the second, will probably come out only next year or so. But the more that Mayor Aldo can ask a question about not just how fast can people move around my little city, how safely can they move around, not just because that matters at a human level, but again, who wants to live in your city if it's that dangerous to be living in it from a travel perspective. The more we quantify that, the more the infrastructure owner is pretty curious about it. Um, Again, as Philadelphians, there were some pretty bad bicycle and pedestrian fatal crashes this
Yeah.
past month. You probably heard about them.
Yep.
And that became a huge issue that at a political level, I'm not necessarily an expert on these things, but if a city government chooses to act on it, that will become some engineer's Monday morning problem, you know?
Speaking of problems, we have crashes, we have accidents, things like that.
Thank you for saying crashes, by the way. Not that I'll go into it, but my boss would not accept this if I didn't say this. We use the word accident because we all say accident. Our one rule, at least in my office, is crash, not accident, because accident implies there's no uh, underlying cause. It was
Mm.
just pure chance. But I'm going to stop there. That's correcting me on myself. But please go on.
Yeah. And in terms of enforcing traffic, speeding cameras
Yeah.
or speeding
Red light
just
cameras.
red
Yeah.
light cameras, yay or nay, and also the what do you call it, the speed trackers. What is it called when
Speed bumps or
not the speed bumps and the ones that kind of take a picture if you go over a speed limit.
Oh, well, that's part of the red light camera.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
same idea.
Thoughts on that? Yay or nay?
From a technical perspective, yeah, they've been shown to work.
Mm.
um, when I was in college, when they came out, as a driving person who would take the boulevard quite a lot, I was like, ah, they're putting them right exactly where I speed, where I know I need to speed. um, and now as a professional, yeah, based on the data we have, at least in this part of the world, yeah, they're definitely working because they're working. Like if the criteria is to reduce um death and severe injuries,
Yeah.
they're working. Um, are there trade-offs again with that? Does it create a sense of, "Ooh, is Big Brother watching me?" and stuff? People feel that, and I'm not gonna say that they're wrong or right to feel it. You're a
Yeah.
person, right? Um, but the main idea is like, yeah, you got highways snaking through cities, and if I showed you or anyone a crash map over the last 3 years of any place, and you saw the red dots on it,
Hmm.
not to be too morbid about it, but like, if we had a grave marker for every fatal and severe crash in any given major city or anywhere, you'd realize you're driving through like a graveyard every single day.
Yeah.
That's not to be hyperbolic. I'm not saying every block of a neighborhood's like that, but definitely the major arteries of city. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
When you're doing a GPS, when you're putting a location on a GPS and you know the routes very well, is it faster to take the highway if it's busy, or should you take the
Well,
local route?
there's no one answer to that question. Like, there's certainly no one answer for that question. It'll change based on condition or whatever else. Myself, I'm very happy to trust Google Maps. They tell me to do X, Y, and Z. Um, but yeah, that's to your question though. That's people thinking about, well, I changed my behavior because I'm trying to game the system. Like one of the issues you run into sometimes is that if we work on a bridge and we make a detour plan for it, and the detour lasts for, I don't know, year and a half, By the time the bridge is done and you reopen the road as normal, you may have changed behavior anyway. And now
Mm.
you have a new unique set of not necessarily large problems, but tiny problems because you'd been traveling people through another route. So yeah, people are always playing this game with themselves. I do. I'm sure you do. How can I get from here to there faster? Because man, I just got to get my things done.
Yeah.
You know, natural thing.
Let's say this is probably for the Philadelphians that are listening.
Sure.
If I want to go from King of Prussia to, let's say, downtown or vice versa,
Yeah.
either way, it's going to be traffic on the 76.
Yeah.
Should I take that or Kelly Drive? Knowing that there's traffic lights. That was where I was going with the local
Sure.
versus
Sure.
highways, but specifically that.
Depends what time of day, man. I mean, listen, if it's 3 a.m. in the morning, take 76.
But what about the five
If it's 5
5
p.m.
a.m. 5 p.m. or the 9 a.m. traffic?
You know, it's terrible. 76 may still win out. It depends on that given day.
Sure.
I'm really lucky to live in a time in an era when we can see live traffic conditions. I actually do that when I drive. I keep my map on, even for places I know how to get there, because I'm always a little curious to see how things change. But my more rhetorical answer to your question would be, if you want to get from KOP to Center City quicker, build a better rail line and avoid that. Do you know what I mean? Like that's really the
I think
core.
something was proposed, but it didn't go through.
It got pretty far along and it petered out.
Mm,
Issues of financing is my understanding.
yeah.
But again, that's kind of the weird overarching thing. The more I get into it, um, every single one, anyone listening to this podcast, you, me, all wondering like, man, I wish I could make like a buck more. And in my case, the more I ponder on it, and this is just me editorializing, but like, you know, your take home pay in some way in this line of work is a reflection of the overall American interest in its infrastructure.
Mm,
Because when a bridge collapses, again, everyone gets what that feels like.
yeah.
No one likes to see a building fall down or see a bridge collapse. So you absolutely spend money to repair it. But when you ask creative questions, or at least, out of the box questions like, hey, what if we put a subway along Roosevelt Boulevard or whatever, or from KOP, or from Reading, Pennsylvania to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, people get into questions of things that, again, engineers are certainly just one of many parties to speak on it.
Right.
Questions of community and identity, right?
Mm,
Because if you build a station here, you might change the identity of that place in ways that are good or different, and some people have different attitudes about those things. I think it gets to a hard spot because the trust that the word engineer, especially with licensed engineer, implies is that this person will be objective and at least truthful, although truth has different baselines. It's really hard because, as a professional, you create attitudes and opinions, but your work that you're paid for and you're responsible to is kind of almost ideally like a doctor's to first like do no harm. And in practice, that's really hard to do because any change you make may be harmful for a party you weren't anticipating. But that's the never ending conversation. That's why I network and I want to learn from more people.
yeah. We'll talk about network
Yeah.
in just a bit.
Yeah.
How does gentrification happen?
If you would answer that question, ask someone who's way more educated than me. But the reason you ask about it, I guess, is because you're seeing it as related to transportation.
Correct.
I'm going to ask now. I promised you I would. I'm going to flip the question back to you for a moment, just because this is something I talk about with colleagues of mine. Different projects get initiated, like say, oh man, let's reduce traffic. How do we do that? Let's create some bike lanes. And you probably read the same news things I do. Bike lanes do come with certain attitudes or certain results that, even though if they may not be quantitatively proven or not proven, there's like jokes like, oh man, if you see that green paint going in your neighborhood, you're about to start paying more for your rent. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I honestly wish I knew. But let me flip the question back to you for a second. As just a regular dude, young dude living in the city, how do you feel about the issues of gentrification as they're affected by getting around? Can I ask you about that?
How does the role of gentrification help you with getting around the city? Is that the
Do you feel like they're connected in any way? Like, do you notice like one thing happens and then the other thing happens?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because for example, right, and some people might not know this outside of Philadelphia. Look at
Sure.
Port Richmond.
Sure.
Port Richmond and maybe in the Fishtown area, they building so much and built an exit
Yeah.
out of the 95
Yeah.
in order for people to move in and out.
Exit 23. Yeah.
Exactly. And now you see a influx of the younger crowd just going
Yeah.
into different, new
Yeah.
restaurants and
Yeah.
James Beard Awards and all this fancy
Yeah.
places that people can mingle and have conversations and network.
Yeah.
And on top of that, now you start seeing the bike lanes now.
Hmm.
Subway stations are getting better and cleaner, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of new buildings that are involved based on that.
Yes. Because, and again, super big disclaimer. Um, this is more me answering as a Philadelphian, not as a professional. Because I believe me, um, taking a class in structural design or in how to make a curb work does not qualify me to know the answers to these questions. As a Philadelphian, though, living through this, and especially as a Temple student, like we'd be hanging out in like Fishtown in like 2012 and Northern Liberties, and man, it went from being this kind of quirky artist neighborhood to a different thing.
Yeah.
I won't. I'll stop it there. Which I was in Fishtown last weekend, but but yeah, like it speaks to the power of infrastructure that if you can get the infrastructure right, a lot of land developers or landowners will be like, man, that was the trickiest part. Not necessarily because, frankly, building a building can be pretty linear. If you have good, competent professionals, good builders, that's not the worst part, you know?
Yeah.
Like someone came, they built this building, and so far, it's not fallen down no one, right?
Mhm.
I hope not. That's that's takes a lot of work, but like, man, what if the issue was that like this street didn't exist here before that? That would be a huge issue because you're touching a lot of people's stuff. When you build on a parcel that you own and you bought, you're the boss.
Yeah.
All you have to do is comply with some permits and get it done. But when you play with like the connectivity, the A to B question, right? That affects a lot of people all at once. Like imagine if this could be my project tomorrow. Suppose it was your project on Monday. You have 2 miles, 2 miles of roadway with various driveways. Half of them go to houses or apartments or a hotel or a business or a Wendy's, or it could be a driveway to the Wells Fargo Center.
Mm.
You doing your kind of job by affecting those 2 miles in some way affects each of them. And that if you can solve that problem, that very large one, is very much easier for the property owners to just say, all right, the real core issue is done. People can move in and out of the area now.
Mm.
Now all I got to do is develop it the right way.
But what triggers that, right?
Working on the area.
Yeah, working on an area, or just think about maybe Fishtown is on a smaller scale. I think about, you mentioned 10 years ago
Yeah.
or 15 years ago,
15 years ago now. Yeah.
that
You're right.
place was a dump.
It was
But
different.
yeah, it was absolutely different.
Yeah.
And what triggered that? Or even we look at a bigger scale, Las Vegas, right?
Oh, man. Yeah.
And it's in a city built on a desert.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you look, years ago, it's literally what it is,
The
desert.
desert.
And then now you have a different streets of
Yeah.
gambling, casinos,
Yeah.
and where people want to have fun,
Yeah.
bigger events. Now you have the Sphere, right?
Right.
But years ago, I wanted to know in your analyses, or maybe in your conversations with other urban planners, what triggers something like that to be built and chosen to have people going in and creating a entire different city.
I could only speculate, although I love to speculate. Um, is it just fun to build in a neighborhood because it has suppressed land values for X, Y, and Z reasons that you can probably imagine?
Yeah, yeah.
Like I think the perspective that at least my colleagues and I like increasingly wonder about is, again, using Philly as an example. There's a reason that the Vine Street Expressway cuts through Chinatown, right? There's a reason it's being capped today, or there's a study anyway, and that's a good thing. But you know, half a century ago or 3/4 century ago, people did what they thought was the best decision and it was good for some and it was harmful for others, right? We face the same challenge today, where in the name of progress and growth and becoming the best Philadelphia we can be, you know, there might be 10 parties involved, and one or two or almost all of them might be infected in ways that are good and really bad.
Mm.
And as a professional on my side, that's exactly why I think increasingly we're becoming sensitive to the notion of what used to be called stakeholder engagement, which is like I plan a project in your neighborhood and then I hold them and and then I'm being cynical here, but and then I hold a meeting saying, let's have the community present to the community. They can come and ask any questions they want. And it's held, you know, from a hour this to hour that, and only certain community members come out because it's that time of day, or it's who's free at Wednesday at you know, 7:30 at night
Yeah.
when you have kids to feed or things to get done or you're studying, right? Increasingly, and this is I hope a good thing, I think it's a good thing. Infrastructure owners, which are usually our clients, which are cities, DOTs, authorities, whatever, are, in my opinion, getting better and better and better at interacting with the communities that they will affect. And I think that's what's critical is that whether you are talking about civil engineers or urban planners or anything else like that,
Mm.
we have technical tools, and using those tools for a while does give us some pieces of insight. But it is one thing for me to you know AutoCAD out your intersection. It is an entirely different thing for me to live where you live.
Got it.
And I would hate for people to think just because they went to a college once upon a time and then got a license once upon a time, they're most competent to just determine the destiny of a neighborhood. Um,
So it's more about like the politics that's involved and what they're going to do to incentivize the builders, the engineers to come out and change the geographic location.
yeah, and that's why it's so hard. That's why it's so hard to talk about because we could. There are so many professionals who work on the issue of gentrification, but yeah, if I'm working on my city, I'd like to be able to work and do projects in the city and not get priced out of my own home,
Mm,
which is not an abstract thought for a lot of I have friends at my level who are moving to different neighborhoods because they can't afford the rent
yeah.
anymore, or rather they can't afford it in a responsible way,
Mm.
and that means a lot, you know, but I could go on about that. So
I want to flip the switch
yeah,
and
yeah.
we talked about gentrification and I want to make the opposite question of that. How does the like poverty level neighborhoods happen?
Oh, again, way above my pay grade, way. But from an infrastructure perspective, this is what I'm increasingly learning, and or rather, we all we all kind of experience this, even if we don't name it per se. There is a role that infrastructure, or maybe the lack thereof, does have to play in communities that are underserved and left in deserts of various kinds. Um, like things like heat islands. Um,
What is that?
heat islands basically a area, a tract of land or a block or whatever, which is hotter relative to other areas around it. Like in Philadelphia, a lot of heat islands happen in the city core, a lot of them in the city core, a little bit to the north. And heat vulnerability is kind of like if you have a heat island and you don't necessarily have the infrastructure that lets you combat it. Um, that's why, for example, in cities like ours, we recently have a tree plan, which is a great idea, I think, to plant trees, which creates various things like cooling effects, increases the kind of carbon dioxide, oxygen kind of back and forth.
Heat as in like physical heat.
Physical heat.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, because what's going out, increasing literature is going out, and this is not a purview of engineering or even necessarily urban planning per se, even though the urban planners are extremely good at mapping it,
Yeah.
and working with that data. Um, it's also a health issue and other kind of thing is, yeah, if we were sitting here right now and this house, because of where it's located, what the street's like, there's more heat absorbing objects, there's less trees. Um, Maybe the roadway isn't draining correctly or any kind of other thing, which can increase other problems. More infrastructure is damaged because it's going through, like, say, um, not just heat, but heat like freeze thaw things in the winter or wherever else. You have an overall deteriorated infrastructure. It changes your living environment, and that can go off in ways that affect human beings in ways that, again,
Mm,
an engineer has no competency to quantify per se,
yeah.
right? But yeah, if you travel around the world, it's not a surprise that a lot of people in either unhealthy or unsafe environments tend to coincide with the place of the poor infrastructure.
Mm,
Which is why when you ask questions like, all right, we want to make people's lives better. Let's try to improve their infrastructure. It's potential that someone else will come along and say, oh, look, they're making that area better. And the land values are kind of depreciated.
mm,
Again, that's not me as an engineer. That's me as an observing person living in the world, seeing that. Where do you go when the balance is, I want to make this piece of the world better. And once I do, it becomes attractive in other ways, which
yeah.
doesn't necessarily serve who I thought I was serving, right? No end to that question. There's no
Got
end
it.
to that question.
Yeah. So it seems like there's multiple variables where there's the
Yeah.
physical heat that people are again forgotten in terms of providing funding for a better infrastructure
Yeah.
and just,
Yeah. Like in my neck of the woods, which is the least has the least rail system in Philadelphia, right? The northeast part of the city. You could say all the traffic deaths and severe accidents that we do have, and we do have quite a lot because that's Roosevelt Boulevard in the city. Again, I'm name dropping that. Um, you know, you might not think about that as in violence in the way you might think about gun violence or say drug violence, but it's the result of a decision that's made or not made that results in every year there'll be some amount of Philadelphians who, or not Philadelphians, but who die in that section of the city. Maybe they would not have died if they had an option for something that was a little bit better infrastructure.
yeah.
Because infrastructure is just the built environment, you know?
Yeah.
It's how you choose to live. If this was hundreds of thousands of years ago, we would talk about whatever forest was nice to live in, and that'd be fine. We built cities so that we could make an environment that's good for us to live in, you
Mm,
know? Um, there are things like, say, in architecture or again, planning, um, this book called like The Gendered City, which is like cities, historically been made by able-bodied dudes.
yeah.
And it goes along
Able-bodied dudes.
guys with with their conventions and tastes about how walking in a city feels like.
Mm,
It's not necessarily informed by, you know, women. It's not necessarily informed by children,
yeah.
but women and children do use these streets. And so how does it feel for people who are not in that place of decision making and power? Hopefully we as professionals can learn to better not just integrate, but actually elevate those people in there. A good example of it is, have you heard of the ADA law or
Mm-mm.
Americans with Disability Access? It's a federal, civil
That
rights law essentially.
that requires people with like handicaps, kind of disabled
Yeah,
parking and
and if
wheelchair
exactly,
accessible.
exactly, and it's only about like just over 30 years old. Um, and that's why you see curb cuts in the street here.
Mm,
That's why there's always things being improved. That's why the city was sued in a class action lawsuit for not having enough of them a few years ago. And kind of these over to wrap up these issues of gentrification or vulnerability or exposure is that a lot of times from our side of it things come down to like just budget and time and ability.
mm,
But my again editorializing is that empathy is rarely a zero sum game.
mm,
And there's this effect which I'm forgetting the name of, but like you create a curb cut so that somebody in a wheelchair, maybe a disabled veteran,
yeah.
can move around and move around with dignity and not have to be escorted, right?
Mm,
Or picked up and off the curb.
sure.
You do that for one kind of party, but then now you've opened it up for what? You can have maybe a kid on his bike come on in and off the curb. You can maybe have a mother take her stroller on
Yeah.
off the curb. So
That
that's
benefits many other parties
yeah,
except for one specific
yeah.
one.
And that is the best kickback, at least for me personally. Besides, the best kickback about civil engineering is to see your stuff built. Huge
Mm,
ego boost. Phenomenal. And the second nice thing is that it's a fundamentally, for me anyway, socially driven project.
yeah.
And that's a great way to just live is that I'm doing work for people,
Yeah.
not just for the bottom line of company XYZ.
Got it. That makes sense.
Yeah.
In terms of civil engineering, what do you see other cities or perhaps in what you're doing now in terms of technological advancement? Like, what are the things that you think is going to come up in traffic? More importantly, too,
Many.
yeah, more importantly, that we're seeing baby boomers
Getting older.
are getting older,
Yeah.
and now we have kind of the Gen Zs and the next generation just come
Yeah.
on, and they're more technological savvy,
Gen Alphas now.
or Gen Alphas, yeah, and people are working from home and
Yeah.
things like that. So, where do you see kind of the next urban planning or just traffic in general?
I love being asked these questions because, like, it implies I have a level of knowledge, which is great. I
That's
love
why
that.
you're here.
Um, I'd say in my opinion, the most critical thing is simply the amount of data that we're able to collect, record, and distribute effectively. Like, say for again, Philadelphia Open Data, which is a website, or rather a collection of websites. The amount of just raw data that you can get right now, um, as a Philadelphian about the city of Philadelphia, not just from a infrastructure perspective, but a lot of things, health outcomes, property records, real estate information. So much of it is public and usable that professionals like us can just move at a higher clip and make better informed choices because we have better data to do it with. Like, every single day I look at crash data, which is very easy, honestly, to work with because it's been so well organized.
Mm,
Like 30 years ago, I mean, a police officer, responds to a crash site, writes a report, it goes into a paper file in the city hall.
mm,
Today, every single one of those is
recorded.
recorded, quantified, and put into an Excel spreadsheet, hundreds of thousands of columns or rows deep. And I can pick and choose what I want, extrapolate data, develop trends, and give my client better points of decision making. That's a general wide answer. You could say that for any industry,
Sure.
but like that's
Better
so
data.
critical. And
Yeah.
because it's taxpayer funded in our case,
Mm.
so much of it is public. So much of it is public, man. Like, if I had a laptop here, I can go on the laptop and look at this exact block and tell you and show you what's happening crash wise or traffic wise here to an extent.
Yeah.
Right. That's awesome. It lets us move faster and make better and more transparent decisions.
Mm.
More specific to traffic stuff, transportation, um, electrification, big deal. AI, big deal. Really increasingly, the intersection of technology. Engineering is by definition a technology based, field.
Yeah.
Whether the technology is just a trebuchet launching like a catapult thing over a wall, or whatever. Or today it's very quickly, a civil engineer will work with an electrical engineer,
Mm.
with a software engineer. Maybe not like hand in hand, but their products touch each other. So now it'll be next time you take Broad Street or whatever, those traffic lights used to be decades ago, would have been either isolated, which is to say they were like little islands to themselves.
Hmm.
Over time, they had better sensors and whatnot. Today, because our computing technology is better, you can drive the entirety of Broad Street, and at least for certain corridors of it, have adaptive signal systems
Hmm.
that are talking to each other, or rather, a program to say, "Oh, I'm getting a lot of demand here.
Yeah.
I'll adjust through the corridor for this length," and you have a better traffic experience, certainly than you would have, without the technology.
Got it.
So yeah, the more you see, the more you see,
So
like,
it's data, technology, just
absolutely, like, it's just again speaking plainly, as a civil engineer with a bachelor's degree, man, I don't know if I should get a master's in engineering or should I get a master's in electrical engineering or a
Yeah.
master's in data science.
there's so much out there.
It's changing rapidly, and frankly, it's a big tent. You could
Yeah.
probably get one. It doesn't matter which one you pick. You'd find someone who can use your skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to shift gear and
Sure.
ask about networking.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
how we met, right?
That's right how we met. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We shared in a networking
Been going well.
networking group. What are your tips for networking with other people, especially in any type of industry?
Be talkative and chatty. No.
Check.
It's weird because I mean, you tell me if you're different, but like, I was a super shy kid, and I feel like I'm more of like a trained extrovert rather than an actual one,
Train extrovert. That's new. I never heard
Yeah.
about that.
or like a deceitful extrovert. Well, it's like having a battery. It's like naturally, I'm very happy to like just sit alone and kind of just read the news or just chill.
Mm.
And if I didn't have that time, I'd be frustrated. And when I'm extroverted, it's more of like almost like a deliberate, you know, It's like you're on the field, so you're playing.
Mm.
You know, not that I don't enjoy being friendly and chatty, but um, your original question was, what tips would you have to start or to be in it?
Both.
Hmm. I guess the most important thing is the attitude that first off, you don't know enough by yourself. So get rid of that, whatever part of your ego depends on that. Get rid of that one. Cause the more people you meet, the more advice you get. And just like if we were 10-year-olds talking about the next video game, or did you see the game last night? The trade of information and feeling and energy, you do the exact same thing as a 25-year-old or a 30-year-old with networking.
Mm.
With us, as Temple students, our intro to networking was pretty sober. Where it was like we were told pretty directly, and this is over 10 years ago now, was, hey, we're not Drexel. You're not, no, seriously, seriously. And this is by all means, shout out to Drexel, like great people. Our Temple, like one specifically was like, hey, you're at Temple for engineering, you're not at Penn State, and you're definitely not at Drexel. And Drexel is a phenomenal engineering school
Mm.
across the board. They're phenomenal for a lot of reasons, but really one of them, I don't know why I'm plugging Drexel, but whatever, is they have phenomenal co-op programs.
Yes.
Because earned experience is important in the industry, but we have internships, but the co-op is so strong. So they said pretty straight up, like, hey, go network, show me you went to this event or this thing or this young member's professional thing. I will give you 5 points on the next quiz. Just go do it. And they're very just straight up about it. So I got lucky that I had people just being like, incentivizing me to do it.
What if you don't have that support system?
Or that pressure? If you don't have it, and I appreciate that for a lot of people, networking sounds like an easy thing to do, but if you don't think you look if for people who look a certain way or come off a certain way, it will definitely be easier. Or at least will be uneasier for unfair reasons, right? So I appreciate when people say I'm not good at or I don't like networking. It's not I don't think I don't take it lightly.
Mm.
I'm lucky. I'd say we're both lucky that we get to have some of the talents we do as people that we can communicate. It seems freely and happily. But I would say networking is a skill worth working on, and just because you're not naturally good at it doesn't mean you shouldn't work on it.
How do
I'm
you
not naturally good at going to the gym, but I'm trying to go to the gym.
how do you do that? How do you
Sure.
start?
The beauty of it is that just like you might have a natural need for the networking event, society or whatever else, they probably already are hoping you'll find them. That's the thing I didn't take into account as a kid. I thought I was always having to put my best foot forward because I'm the one who's lucky to be here. And it's a good attitude to have.
Yeah.
It's good to be like that. But now that I'm on the other side of it, organizing a few things myself and realizing, oh man, I hope the kids come to our thing. Right? So realize that you're not just some lowly, college kid or kid not from a different community or whatever else. With networking, you might run to people from different backgrounds and income levels that you were not from. And for me personally, I still sometimes think about that.
Yeah.
But these places are looking for people who have energy and interest just as much as you're looking for a place that has experience and connection.
Mm.
So the door is not, it's not just a one-way thing where you're climbing up the hill. They're hoping you're coming along.
Yeah.
And frankly, whether it's college or not, really, any line of work, you've probably seen things like in general, there are less people being born, at least at this current moment in the United States, or whatever else. There are definitely less kids going to college.
Mm.
In our line of civil engineering, man, there's a little bit of a shortage. To be frank with you, if you're in any kind of line of professional work or anything, but God, there's so many people like from their age 30 and onwards where like where are the young people at anymore? I need someone to train and educate. So this is probably the best time to be in networking. Because when I started networking a decade plus ago, it was different. I would wear like a suit and tie to make myself look presentable to someone, and that's a good thing. But now I realize it's like your ability to show up and care is tremendous because, say a 25-year-old could be off watching TV
Yeah.
on a Thursday night, and you chose to come out to this stuffy hotel room, listen to a technical session, and chat with some people that you don't know. Um,
Yeah, there's definitely a strong, strong
yeah,
point on that, that especially the younger generation, it's all social media, right? It's all
yeah,
about the technological things.
yeah,
Even dating, we have
yeah,
multiple different dating apps now.
yeah.
Uh, it's difficult. So
And it might not come naturally to you.
yeah,
That's okay.
and
That's okay.
just coming out and meeting people, oh, that's really intimidating,
Yeah,
and especially in networking events where there's the technical, you mentioned like the technical stuff that is
sure.
discussed, we get intimidated by the fact that we don't know all these things. It might be overwhelming,
Yeah,
especially when you meet people who are just as old as your parents or maybe even older.
yeah,
You're like, why am I in this room? I'd rather be people around my age, and
yeah,
people around my age tends to be with going to parties, having
yeah.
fun, and doing extracurricular
All to
activities.
that point though, and I was gonna ask you how you felt when you started networking, because I'm curious to know if you were always so good at it as you are now. um, but to your point about parties though, by the way, the serious answer why I would say, oh no, not half bad at networking
Not half bad.
is because those house parties I went to, like, I don't know if house parties was part of your growing up. For me, from age 18 to like 23 at least, different house parties every other weekend. And it was not about work. It was about drinking and watching football or whatever
Sure.
else. That is networking too. Networking is really just a multi-syllable word that we're talking.
Socializing.
Yeah, socializing. And honestly, networking is a bit easier because when you're socializing at a party, oh man, what is this person like? I don't
Mhm.
know. If you go to a networking event about civil engineering topics, it's a reasonable conclusion that the other people there will be interested in civil engineering topics.
Yeah.
So if anything, it makes it a bit easier. Um, and you know, that's why it's good to kind of keep a tab on it. I really like appreciate when people come and they're not necessarily super networky, and you can kind of tell that. And what you have to do is like willing to reach out to them, bring them in. And for someone, if you're shy, very shy, or whatever, what's nice about these professional orgs, at least, is that they have so many windows of volunteering. And sometimes one of the best ways, if you don't feel like you're the most chatty person and you can't just like make people laugh, that's okay. Maybe you can display value and connection by saying, "Oh, you do this event? I'll help you volunteer at some, very easy to do level." And now you're part of the team,
Mm.
you know?
So if you have a hard time socializing with the people or
Yeah.
the attendees that's
Yeah.
there, it's much better to just volunteer yourself. Now you're in that forced situation of, okay, now I really have to do stuff, and
Yeah.
perhaps you get a quick shout out, and
Yeah.
you have a conversation starter. Oh, I'm actually doing this for this event.
Yeah.
What makes you bring here? What brings you here? And
Right.
you start that conversation, and now you have that forced interaction that
Right.
causes you to network a little bit more.
Yeah, and honestly, like, another thought is that, like, it always sucks to feel like the odd kid in class, and I've been there. I've been there many
There
times.
are strengths to being the odd kid in the class.
Yeah, but put it this way, like, the people who, take socializing for granted, those people probably aren't at networking events anyway.
True.
Because again, it's a Thursday night in whatever season, and you could be anywhere. You could be at the bar, you could be at your house playing video games, you could be on date night, whatever else. You chose to go to a kind of work-related thing. You might not be that good at socializing, but probably half that room is also not very good at socializing. They're so invested in this particular topic, they chose to come out to this rather than go out and watch the game on Thursday night or whatever.
Yeah,
And that's what's kind of interesting is whether it's college or networking, wherever else, lean into your weird thing and you'll find your tribe. And your
absolutely.
tribe doesn't have to be static. It can grow and it can change and, flex. But lean into, again, what you love, not because of a heartwarming feeling, but because it's good strategy.
Mm,
If you lean into what you love, you tend to find a lot of people like you. Like I don't know a lot of musicians because I happen to. I know a lot of musicians because I hung out at music stores and I've
mm,
just goofed around. Like it's the same way. If like okay, if your passion is just, you know, highway topics and civil engineering, you go to a group that's about that, and there is such a group, and very suddenly you realize you kind of fit in with them, not just because you have that one topic in common, but you probably have other things in common too. So at minimum, if it makes you uncomfortable to do it, just Force yourself. So I
Fi-
tell myself go to the gym.
Find the find the things that you love. That's what we talked about in the beginning of the podcast,
Yeah.
and find the people that love the things that you love.
Yeah. And then be completely okay with it that you don't have to work in terms of absolute.
Yeah,
Again, 50 or 60 or 70% love or like is still useful information.
yeah. I like the mindset that you mentioned earlier of you know, you're not the only one that is nervous. You're not the only one that is scared, and the event organizers are appreciative of you just being there and showing up, as opposed to not having anyone at all. That would be like a failed event, right? So
Yeah. No.
just know that you're appreciated just by being there, and it's okay to
Yeah.
be intimidated, to be overwhelmed.
Yeah.
But I think the best thing is you come out of that event knowing that you did it. That's the
Yeah.
best feeling of,
Once you know you did it once.
yeah.
Cause like seriously, like if as a like man, just like earlier, you come to a place and it's some hot summer afternoon and you think you're there to network and you're like, oh man, why am I sweaty? Why did I walk that far from the parking lot? You know? What the hell? And but then we're like, oh, I'm not wearing exactly the kind of things that they're wearing here. I don't look so professional, quote unquote. Fine, it's data. You took it in and you're learning now. You're
Mm,
part of the system. You know what I mean? Like uh, we're all social animals. It's going to be pretty hard to get along without socializing, but find the places. I would say this rather than networking side, at least network in ways that appeal to you, even if they're not about work per se
yep.
or career. If it's about playing pickup soccer games or whatever, or board games, and again, in the city of Philadelphia, whatever thing you're into, there's probably some place that serves your interest. Go do that because that's the nice thing about the earned experience in networking. Hanging out with friends is a networking skill. If you've already done that in one arena, at least one, you'll probably do it in another one,
Yeah.
you know? And even if you're not good at that necessarily, if you like what you do, that itself is the topic and you just bring yourself to places where they talk about that topic.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I've been networking for, I think I started in the real estate industry about 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And that was my first actual networking event. It was
Mm,
a real estate event.
yeah.
And
How did you feel?
oh, I was intimidated, man. I was 18 years old at the time.
Yeah.
And at the time, I had a kind of cleaning business. I was the
Yeah.
business development kind of sales guy. And
Yeah.
I thought that I could make more money dealing with people who have houses, right? That's
Right.
hence why I went to that real estate event. And I remember in that bathroom, I mentioned this a couple times throughout other podcast episodes too, that
Yeah.
I was very, very nervous.
Mm,
The event started at 6 o'clock. I got there at 5:30.
yeah.
And when I got there, I was in the bathroom for the first 30 minutes because I know, okay, I'm gonna my goal was I'm gonna be there at 6, and then I'm gonna greet people as people come in, and
Yeah.
once the event kind of kind of have a lot of people, I know everyone because they came in.
Right.
That was my goal
Yeah.
or strategy.
Right.
However, I was in that bathroom for 30 minutes plus just
Yeah.
washing my face. And I was like, I got this, I got this.
Yeah.
And obviously there were a bunch of older folks that
Right.
I didn't know, and also the vocabulary that were
Yeah.
used back and forth.
Right.
And obviously, as a young person, you don't know what value that you're going to give. It's everyone's there, have their own skill sets and things that they're good at, and you're like, oh,
Well, and
can
that's
I clean your
actually
houses?
well, that's actually interesting because like, as I'm kind of on the window seat of being a young person, we all know the idea of you need a mentor because you want to move up.
Sure.
We all get that. As I get older, a mentor of mine who's an older person, uses you also as you get older will need to get good at mentoring down, which is to say, someone who's younger than you can still be serving a form of mentoring you because they're giving you exposure to perspectives that because of your age or position you don't have access to anymore.
Mm,
You know, like it's I remember how it feel like I remember the feeling of being like a first year, entry level engineer. And now I realize like that I can now that I delegate to a few of them, oh, I wonder how they perceive me. You know what I mean? And it's hard to get to that if you're not actually hanging out with people and learning from them. That's why, like for me, like if I go to a networking event and I chat and hear the perspectives or the complaints of a 25-year-old, that really means a lot to me now, actually,
mm,
because I want to be responsible for the 25-year-olds I'm around. You
yeah.
know? Not obviously beyond just giving work and whatnot, but like this process of learning, there's no one technique and there's no end to it. But wherever you started at, whether it's like playing Dungeons and Dragons at this game place, or playing pickup soccer, or networking at a professional event, I've found that if you lean into your weirdness, you'll find your tribe pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And that's probably the hard part is admitting where you think you're weird. In reality, you're not weird at all. You just haven't found out your people yet.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. You're not the odd one in the
No.
community.
No, because again, for our interests, I mean, like, who wants to spend this many evenings of like so many fun things to do in the city talking about questions of, land use or development? So many people, their eyes would just glaze over.
I think it's
You
a
have to
lack.
lean into your weirdness.
I think it's the lack of goals.
Mm,
Like if you don't have, the mindset comes first,
yeah,
obviously, but going to these events, if you're just going it might not be as effective as you think. But if you have a set goal, I mentioned earlier, I went to that event so then I could get more clients.
right.
And I'm pretty sure there's other people who have similar goals
Yeah.
and probably in different industries, but at the end of the day, once you go into there are times where I still feel nervous of going to events. Like even
Same,
if
actually. Same.
yeah,
Yeah.
even in groups that I
Sure.
never been to, I'd be in a car and I'm like, should I go? I
I'll
don't.
be honest with you, like,
Yeah,
there are days, like, I've been signed up for XYZ event, and it's just, like, the wrong Tuesday, I'm just, like, kinda tired.
yeah,
I'm like, "You know what? I'm not going. Screw
yeah.
this," And that's okay. And sometimes your goal is just to prove to yourself you can hang in there, that's fine. For me, I actually didn't for a lot of them, I don't go with a stated goal per se, but I go with, like, if you wanted to say if you wanted to become a great basketball player in the neighborhood, probably the best thing to do is hang out at the court where people are playing basketball. Like,
Sure.
my dad would always say is like, if you want to catch a cold, try to hang out with sick people.
Hmm.
And I kind of look at successful habits the same way.
Mm.
I don't go to networking events thinking, what is Aldo going to tell me today? But if I go to events where I hang out with Aldo and 10 people kind of like Aldo, in terms of energy and interest, you don't come around with any specific piece of advice, but you let yourself get sick. And I mean that in a good way. You let yourself get that contagion, because it's one thing, that is exactly how I felt like when I was in the beginning of college trying to study. And I'm like, I don't want to study. I want to just not do this. I'm not interested. But then you meet people who are fired up and you're like, no, no, no. I want to study because I want to prove that I can hang in with them on this thing. And you let that social element merge with your technical requirement. And that's really how I apply actually personally for personal issues or career related ones. My main thesis for myself when it comes to networks and people in general is find what you'd rather be like or what you would like to be good at and simply bring yourself into proximity repeatedly with people like that. Because even if you retain 10% of what an excellent person knows, that 10%, it
Mm.
may be way more than what these people know.
Yeah.
So that's kind of it actually. Like, that's why I go to so many networking things because contrary to this interview, like, I am by no means, I'm a pretty regular staff engineer, getting a little senior now, but like, regular person. My thought is I go to people who've been investing in this for decades, longer than I've been alive, maybe, and get even 5% of what they got and think about what they do. That's a much better use of my time and energy than reading about it abstractly and saying,
Mm.
I'll figure it out my own. That is a useless attitude,
Yeah.
you know?
That's awesome. Now, I ask this question
Sure.
for every guest.
Sure.
It's the same question that I ask
Yeah.
all the guests.
Yeah.
The name of the podcast is called Kaizen Blueprint,
Yeah.
and Kaizen is a Japanese term for continuous improvement.
Mm,
What are the things that you do on a daily basis,
mm.
whether that's habits, tools, systems, you name it, that has benefited you greatly that you think can benefit other people?
I compliment myself quite a bit,
Really?
which is pretty bad. It sounds pretty bad. It sounds pretty bad, man. But no, like, I put it this way. I think all of us are usually pretty good at countering our losses or our internal failures over time. This may be me being an egotistic person, but that's okay. Um, but I kind of over time, like, just told myself, you know what, Dan, like, you're pretty good about counting your losses. You're pretty good about cataloging all your mini failures that probably no one but you notices.
Mm.
if you're going to do that, or if you can't stop yourself from doing that, and it's hard for me to stop doing that, probably for a lot of people, you might you should at least try to be even-handed and count your wins. Um, so if I can go through like a not necessarily a day, but like say at least a work week where I do something that like even if it's not objectively impressive, is impressive for me, like or at least breaking some sort of ground for me, like congratulate yourself on that and let yourself get a little bit of a healthy ego boost or a
Mm,
hit or a hit. Like recently, like man, I'm just spending the summer like, like getting back slowly to the gym and whatnot. And I can feel myself like climbing out of the hole I've been digging myself into.
sure.
But, if you don't take appreciation for what you're doing right, you're going to give yourself a weird funhouse mirror when you only self criticize. So you have to make not self congratulatory stuff, but you have to be willing to catalog yourself honestly. Most people are very good at doing that in the negative aspect, but it takes a little bit of discipline, but it's also fun to do that in the positive aspect.
Have you ever heard of David Goggins?
I've heard of him. I'm not super familiar.
He's a hardcore like dude.
Fitness?
Yeah,
Yeah.
his fitness
Yeah.
and mindset. He wrote a few books about mindset, and it's great if you're working out or
Yeah.
just listening. And one of the things that he talks about in his book, and one of the concept that he uses, similar to what you said, compliment yourself, is called the cookie jar,
Oh,
the
okay.
cookie
Yeah.
jar method. So let's say you're going through a tough,
Breakup.
yeah. I wouldn't say a breakup, but more challenging things like going to the gym
Yeah, yeah.
and you're having perhaps like stagnate. You're like, "Ah, I don't
Yeah,
feel changes in my weight or my
yeah,
muscle or just anything." What he would say is think about like a cookie jar and then you have a bunch of cookies inside that cookie jar and then
yeah,
you just grab the cookie and each cookie is kind of like, okay, I went to the gym 3 times last week, so I did something good. Okay,
yeah,
I'm going to the gym and that's good enough for me to be here and
yeah,
then strive to do better.
right.
So just thinking about the life challenges that you have, know that you've been through so much yourself in the past that you can fight through whatever challenges that you have in this current
Yeah,
stage, in this present moment.
yeah, I think it's like if if you only saw the past week of mistakes you made, oh, that would kind of suck.
Yeah.
You would feel like not getting out of bed, and sometimes you do not feel like getting out of bed. But if you try to make it a discipline of saying, "Oh, I did that thing right," or "I did that thing I didn't think I could do that way," even if it's like a small thing where like for me, um, I just presented some information last week that really helped out where it needed to be helped out. And that's a win, not just for me, but for other people. And it's like, let yourself feel good about that. Actually feel good and not dwell on it too long, but let yourself feel the hit
Mm.
and have an accurate accounting of yourself. And that's sounds easy to do. It's not. Our brains kind of like, cause we all, I guess, evolutionarily grew up in jungles or whatever else. We're very good at identifying what we think is a threat. And the threat isn't usually what it used to be, which was it used to be like a tiger in the jungle. It's usually maybe like a social faux pas or some measure of what you think you haven't done yet. Oh, I didn't get this degree yet. I didn't get that salary yet. I didn't get the promotion. Oh, I didn't get the house or the car, or the whatever. And you feel it in your body and your brain the same way you might feel a real threat, like a tiger trying to eat you, but
Mm.
it's not.
Yeah.
So realize that piece of your brain is running just like machinery because that's how you evolved, but don't take shame in it. And then bring in this notion of if I'm going to self criticize and I can't stop it or I don't want to stop it, fine. Let me at least self praise as well in an objective way.
Yeah, and it's good for you, and it kind of strive you to push forward.
Yeah.
I like to think of it. I mean, you've done a really good analytics of being in a jungle, but I like to just simply think about like let's say you're running a
Yeah.
marathon,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're on mile 3, and you're like, I want to give up right now.
Yeah.
But hey, look at what you've done. You've done 3 miles so far, and then you just keep striving forward. You've
Right.
been training this for X amount of time,
Right.
and you're doing this. It's okay, and
Yeah.
that's what I like to think about in life and in any challenges that you have in life.
Right. I just, it's so weird that the games we play ourselves, but I guess as I've been chatting just now, the idea of whatever rules or advice you get, there's never an end of advice. You know, don't let the idea of the absolutes be governing for it. You know, like it doesn't have to be, oh, I entirely hate this or I entirely love this or I don't feel it yet or I don't feel it at all. And if I don't feel it now, I won't feel it later. Allow for those percent differences and those gray areas to happen,
Mm,
and, realize that there's strategy in that, not just feeling good.
yeah.
But that's my thought.
What's next for you?
Dinner. No, no, no. No, next for me is like, so my next career path thing will be to get a license, professional engineering license, which is like a huge capstone, because it makes you legally responsible. And after that, man, I mean, emotionally, I'm more and more interested in getting a master's degree.
Okay.
um, but no, like for me, I've been learning a lot about that again, that notion of safety, from a traffic perspective. I'd like to take a lot of that and use it for a city like Philadelphia, you know? So that's the
Getting
hope.
making a change in a city that you live in.
Yeah, no, no, that's the cool thing. Like, you know, I'm not I don't get the kick out of doing it for the technical thing. I get the kick out of people using what you make.
Yeah.
That's almost
Creating
the
an
kick.
impact.
Yeah, because if it's not about other people, then it's kind of just a wash,
Yeah.
But
Where can
that's mine.
That's good. Where can people find more about you?
Probably LinkedIn. Um, LinkedIn, my name. You can put a little like floating text box right here.
Okay.
But no, Dan Bhaumik. Um, and yeah, that's the perfect place to find out about me. And if you don't see me on some other YouTuber website, find me there.
Last question.
Yes,
If you could redesign any city in the world, which one would it be and why?
Philadelphia. Redesign any city. No, I mean, my stated goals. I would like to work on this one. I'd like to redesign this city because it's the one I grew up in. It's the one I love. And for the part of the city I live in, it lacks a lot of what I actually work on.
Okay.
Man, I would like to make Northeast Philly a lot more transit friendly. That'd be my little piece I would like to redesign.
What's the other? Let's do top three. Top three things you would change in Philadelphia. Go.
As me or as a professional?
As you said, both. Got three.
Okay. All right. This cars thing essentially is not going to work any further than it already has worked. You have to lean into transit. So it'll be better for all of us. Two, it would be nice to improve a place and then not make it so expensive that we kick people out of it effectively. That sucks. um, and three. Hmm.
Yeah. Final one.
Oh man, we have so many good things. I would say improve the food scene, where our food scene is phenomenal. Um, you know what? No, make it easier to just walk and bike around here, man. It sounds easy to do. We get rated as being a very walkable city, but if you get outside the city core, it can change pretty rapidly. I'd like this to be a place that like people can just get around the region, not just from inside Philly to Philly, Camden, Philly, KOP, whatever else. Like, there's so much of what as Americans we grow up in. We think we're relatively social, but compared to places like Amsterdam or Japan, our idea of socializing, I would argue, is a little bit underdeveloped. Let's have a more social and friendly and safe place.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And any final tips for other civil engineers out there?
Oh, young ones, I guess. Yeah. Man, tips. You know what? I've seen some resumes lately related to my stuff.
Better
Um,
resumes.
yeah, like don't make for anyone trying to get hired anyway, I guess, or younger people. Don't like throw the whole kitchen sink at me, because pick what you actually like and feel you're good at, and make it just that. And I guess back to what we said earlier, though, just like lean into the thing that you think you would like to learn about if you were not getting paid for it.
Mm,
Because that's really what I'm doing now. I'm doing the piece of civil engineering that I'd be interested in, even if I didn't work in this at all.
yeah.
So having done that, this has made my current career arc so much more fun. Like, I feel like my biggest fear as a kid was like, in order to become a successful adult paying the bills, I'm gonna have to some extent kill that kid and his interest, and that felt like a huge betrayal. I hated that feeling. And only recently, in these past 3-ish, 4-ish years, I feel like I've honored that 12-year-old that I was. So yeah, find a way to, I guess, honor the kid that you were, because you didn't get an engineering really because you said, "Oh, I want this income level or some stuff." If you really wanted income, you'd probably do something besides civil engineering. Yeah, find a way to honor that kid and find what is kind of weird and find your tribe with that. So
Find your tribe, honor that kid, doing the things that you love.
yeah,
Talk about a lot of
for
things.
sure. Yeah.
Dan, thank you so much for being on
Thank
the
you,
show.
man. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Signing
Excellent.
out.
Thank you.
Peace. Thank you so much for watching or listening to the Kaizen Blueprint podcast. If you got value from today's episode, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review. It really helps us grow and reach more listeners like you. And don't forget to stay connected. Subscribe to our newsletter at kaizenblueprint.com for exclusive insights, resources, and updates. Keep striving for growth, take action. And remember, small, consistent improvements create massive impact. See you on the next episode. Peace out.